liaisons? Any?
We have none.
None. Okay. Any declarations of interest? Any new declarations of interest? I guess we've got existing ones where I'm a member, a deferred member of the scheme. Yeah. Okay. Minutes of the meeting in March. Was it in March, the meeting? I did look at them. Yeah, 16th of March. Hang on, let me just try and this is the bit I don't like about Google Meet. It turns up as a tab on your browser as opposed to a thing. Let me see if I can move this tab out. Okay. Right. You have to do things. Right. Any matters of accuracy? I found on the minutes, I found a 2020, which was obviously a typo in 6.4, I think it was. No, not 6.4. Somewhere I saw a 2020, which was, 4.6. Michael Hartney asked for clarification achievability of the target date of September 2020. I think Michael probably meant 2022.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah.
Have you got any? Has anyone else got any matters of accuracy in the minutes?
I thought I mentioned and asked for a kind of like initial paper on the pensions dashboard and our staging date, just in the early assessment. I'm just conscious that that's coming forward, and we've met the cloud. There's lots of noise in the press about LGPS being ready for such a industry undertaking. I couldn't see any reference to that in the minutes.
Where would it have been in which item? Do you recall, Michael?
I think when we were talking about data.
Okay. Let me find this.
So I think that's just a future agenda item.
Okay. Okay, so we think we should add something, a data dashboard.
Yes, it's the pensions dashboard, the new industry initiative that's quite regularly in the press, and I guess the preparation for Equinity and Hackney to participate by their staging date.
Do you understand the ask, Rachel?
Sorry, I'm just unmuting myself. Yes, I do. And Michael, we will be bringing the pensions dashboard as an agenda item. I think probably to the next board meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else on the minutes from anyone? No. Right. Sorry. Pop this out so now I can't find it. Training. Let's do the training. Accounting and procurement. Is that you, Catherine?
It's a mixture of me and Rachel, so I don't know which of us you want to go first, Rachel, me or you.
I think if you go, the bulk of the training, to be honest, I think I'm happy to take procurement as the formal training, and then provide an additional update around the accounting when we get to the agenda item in question.
Okay, let me just try and share. Doesn't seem to want to let me share the slides. I seem to remember having this issue last time. Have you got them handy, Rachel?
Just if I should be able to share them for you. Hold on a moment.
Sorry, it doesn't seem to.
No, that's all right. Don't worry.
I'm pressing share and nothing's happening.
Nothing is happening. That's okay. Just bring them up. Training. So let's. So we're just clear a few procurement items from my screen. Let's see if I can share it.
I might be sharing now.
Oh, perfect. Sorry, I've just brought it up, but it was refusing to share for me either. So.
Okay. Can people see my slides?
Mhm.
Okay. So what we're going to talk about briefly today is just an overview of procurement rules and the management of suppliers within the local government pension scheme. So why are we talking about procurement? You'll probably have already noticed from the board papers that there are some procurement exercises coming up for the fund in the not too distant future. And it is also a SIPFA requirement. So the next couple of slides. So has that moved on for you?
Yes.
Okay. So these are the SIPFA competencies for the pensions committee. The next slide is the competencies for the pension board. They're very, very similar, but the wording is very slightly different. So as you can see there is a requirement under the SIPFA knowledge and skills framework for pension board members to have an understanding of the rules around procurement and the management of suppliers. So that's why we're talking about this today. So the rules for public procurement are set out in legislation. So obviously, as the pension fund is part of the local authority, it has to abide by the public procurement rules. So there are various sets of regulations which are set out at the bottom of that slide that all local authorities have to abide by when procuring services and suppliers. The basic legal principles of these rules are that there will be equality of treatment for all bidders, the process will be transparent, and there will be appropriate competition and value for money. So let's look a little bit more detail at those requirements. So hopefully you're seeing a slide now with lots of different hexagons on. Please shout if you're not. So there's lots of detail in the regulations, and I'm not going to go into all the detail. I'm not going to go through every hexagon on this slide, but just to pull out some of the key points. These are all the sort of things that have to be considered as part of the tender process. So there are different types of tender, such as an open tender or restricted tender, which is about the number of bidders that can apply. And in a moment, I'll also talk about frameworks, which is something that the fund often uses. Tenders must have strict criteria for determining which supplier is appointed. There's a requirement to investigate any tenders that are considered abnormally low. So you can't just ignore a tender that you think where the bid put forward is too low. There is a requirement to actually look into it and try and understand why it's been priced that way. There are also thresholds for how you have to do procurement. For example, there's a small lots provision, which I think is around 70,000. So if the total value of the contract being let is under that, you don't have to go through quite the full procurement process. A lot of the regulations fall away there. One other thing just to pull out on that slide is you'll see on one of the red hexagons, it's got contract award criteria meet, and that stands for most economically advantageous tender, which is all about making sure that you get the right value for money, being obviously a public sector organisation. Underpinning all of this is the fact that each council has its own contract procedure rules, which explain how the legislation applies to that particular council. And you can find the Hackney Council contract procedure rules in the council's constitution. It's really important that pension funds, the LGPS pension funds, do stick to the procurement requirements when going out to tender. It does happen sometimes that there can be challenges. Sometimes these can be resolved informally, but sometimes they can go to court. So you'll see there's the reference to a legal case, Aquila Haywood versus Local Pensions Partnership Administration Limited. So Local Pensions Partnership Administration, LPPA, is a body that undertakes administration for a number of London boroughs in particular. And Aquila Haywood is a software supplier to the local government pension scheme. And Aquila Haywood challenged the decision in a procurement for a software provider, and LPPA ultimately had to go through the tender process again because they conceded that there were errors in the process. And then there was a lot of argument over who was paying the legal costs as well. So obviously all of that could be avoided by making sure that the procurement was carried out properly in the first place. So it's something to be aware of, that it can be quite time consuming and expensive if that's not done. So just moving on to talk about the frameworks. There are a number of national frameworks specifically for the local government pension scheme, and these are run by Norfolk County Council on behalf of all the LGPS funds. So the hexagons on this slide show the current live frameworks. The dark grey ones are investment related. The blue ones are the sort of more administrative ones, and then there's legal services as well. So the way these work is there's one very large procurement process for each framework, which Norfolk County Council carries out in partnership with some other LGPS funds, and Hackney has participated in those exercises in the past. So that results in a list of suppliers on each framework, and those suppliers have already been determined to meet the minimum standards required. So we know they're already fit for purpose if they're on the framework. So when LGPS administering authorities need a particular service and they use the framework, they can just do what's called a mini tender, mini competition, which is more focused on the actual requirements of that specific fund. There's also options for where you've got one-off project work to be subject to a direct call-off, and if you're doing that, you don't have to ask for bids from multiple firms. You can just pick one of the suppliers on the framework that you determine meets your needs best, and then just ask them if they can do the work for you. So Hackney Council does use the framework for most of, if not all of its consultancy type services, such as investments, actuarial and benefits and governance contracts. So this slide just shows you some of the key suppliers for the Hackney Fund. Most of these you're probably familiar with already. So obviously Fund Actuary Hymans, third party administrator is Equinity. Most funds where the administration is done in-house will have a software provider. Obviously Hackney doesn't, because they use Equinity and therefore use Equinity software. Hymans is also the investment consultant. External auditor is usually the same as the council one. And then you've got benefits and governance, which is us, obviously, Aon. There's various others mentioned there, things like project management, admin support. Again, these are perhaps more commonly used by councils where the administration is done in-house. A lot of that sort of stuff is carried out either by us, Hymans, or Equinity for Hackney under the current, under the other contracts. And the last slide I'm going to talk about today is about monitoring suppliers. So once you've done the procurement and you've got a supplier in place, that's not the job finished. Obviously, there are various requirements to make sure that the suppliers are monitored to make sure they're delivering as expected. So there's various things mentioned on this slide. You've got the miners principles, which hopefully you're familiar with, which are the principles for being in public life. And one of those is about making sure arrangements are in place for the measurement of performance of specifically investment managers there, but it does apply wider as well. And again, as part of the procurement legislation, it does set out legislation about monitoring suppliers. There's also a requirement, we've got CMA objectives there, that's the Competition and Markets Authority. There's a requirement from them to set strategic objectives for investment consultants, and all of these things should be regularly reviewed to make sure that suppliers are doing what you want. And there's some examples in the hexagons of the kind of things that you'd be looking for. So are they keeping in line with their own professional conduct rules? So for example, the actuaries are obviously part of the FIA. So they have to make sure that they're sticking to those regulations as well. And then there's things like, are the suppliers sticking to the SLAs that have been agreed with the fund? Have there been any complaints, breaches of the law, all that kind of thing? So lots of things that should be going on to make sure that suppliers are meeting the requirements of the fund. And just to flag as well that this is something that's going to be more explicit in the new, the pensions regulators' new single code. So the current code of practice doesn't really cover suppliers to the fund, but that is a module in the new regulators code. So the fund will need to demonstrate compliance with the requirements in that code, that it is monitoring what its suppliers are doing. Has anyone got any questions about any of that?
Couple of things. One, just totally, how has Norfolk ended up as lead kind of authority for doing the frameworks? I'm just kind of interested, really. How?
Yeah, I'm not actually sure. I guess they were just the council willing to take it on. I think a group of councils sort of got together and were discussing it, and thought it would be a good idea. And Norfolk volunteered, drew the short straw. I'm not sure which.
So that's essentially the background. Basically, they were set up probably around 2012, 2013 from memory, and the government had essentially there'd been some criticism from central government of the way that the way that the LGPS procured services. Essentially, we were all carrying out full ODU procurements for essentially the same services, and this was being repeated across 101 funds. So it's the programme's tagline is sort of for LGPS funds by LGPS funds. Norfolk have quite a well-resourced procurement and legal department, so they volunteered to host it, and it's funded by the framework users, which is mostly LGPS funds. I think a couple of government departments can use them as well, and they're also available to the asset pools. So it got quite a lot of attention from central government, because it has made a huge difference to how we procure, and it's made an awful lot of things a lot easier.
I mean, it seems like a great idea. I was just curious how,
Yeah, no, it was just
they
were there at the beginning, and they were there at the beginning, and they had the internal resource to do it, and that's how it ended up with them.
And they continue to have the internal resource, presumably, because it's now funded off the.
Yeah, it's now a dedicated program, so it has its own staff.
Yeah, basically, whenever a fund wants to use a framework, they have to pay a sum of money to use it. So that's how it's funded, basically.
And
the
sense.
Suppliers themselves actually also pay a rebate. So suppliers appointed through a framework pay a rebate as well, which helps to support it.
Yeah, so we've appointed Aon as our governance and benefits advisor through the framework. So for every bit of work they do for us, we do slowly build up rebate payments. So thank you, Catherine. We are currently slowly attracting one as we speak.
Yeah.
Michael, have you got any questions?
No, I mean, it all sounds very sensible to have a framework around that type of thing, and it is extremely complex. And the local government probably get challenged with appointing providers and resourcing it, like you say, Rachel, and having a central authority that can coordinate some of this stuff. Sounds.
What it's also done that's been really, really helpful for smaller funds as well, is that it has allowed us to use specialist advice for some of the particularly technical ones. So, for example, on custodial procurements, it's allowed us to then use an external advisor collectively to essentially go in and at the framework stage evaluate the technical capabilities of the custodian, which obviously would have been hugely expensive to do by ourselves, but you feel it's sort of, it feels necessary to do it, and it saves a huge amount of money to do it via the framework rather than individually.
I mean, the fact that all the things in the training seem to me eminently sensible, and I reflect that you read about some other public procurements that perhaps don't seem to have quite that rigor, and I'm glad that pensions do have that rigor. It's important. It's they're long-term activities, so if you get things wrong, there are long-term and systemic issues with it. So yeah, it all seems good. But like Michael, there's nothing there. There was nothing unexpected in that training.
No.
Yeah. Okay, great. And is there anything you want us particularly, other than all the good stuff about transparency and proper process and value for money, anything else you want us to take from that training that we make?
It's just being aware of all the various legislation and being aware of the frameworks and how they work, because obviously there's a paper a bit later in the board about the third-party administration contract, so it's useful to have that awareness when thinking about that paper. But no, it's just to make sure you're aware that the fund can't just go off and do what it likes. There are regulations around what they have to do.
Regulations in pensions, good lord. Whatever will I think of next? Okay, great. Shall we move on to the next item, which is the actuarial valuation? Are you going to speak to that, Rachel, to add anything?
Yes, I will. Yes, I will talk through this one. Let me just bring up the correct paper. So essentially, this paper, along with the exempt appendices, it sets out the initial results at whole fund level for the 2022 valuation, and it also sets out our draft funding strategy statement. So essentially, once this has been seen by the board and it's been approved in draft form by committee, it then goes out to consultation with employers. So they will have until early next year to read through the funding strategy statement and come back to us with any particular queries. We very rarely get any on the funding strategy statement. So essentially, we have to publish. We have to undertake a formal valuation every 3 years. So last valuation was 31st of March 2019, which then set contribution rates from 1st of April 2020. This valuation date is 31st of March 2022, and the contribution rates will be coming in from the 1st of April 2023. So at the previous valuation, funding the single funding level, which we're required to disclose, it's obviously heavily reliant on the assumptions that we've agreed with the fund actuary. So single funding level was 92%, and the fund was able to bring contribution rates gradually down. So we'd started at 33%, and the council's now reduced its contribution rate to 30%. So this valuation, there's been a number of changes in economic conditions. So what we've seen is essentially we've seen a significant increase in the funding level to I think our single funding level is now around 106%, and that's been driven partly by good, strong asset performance, which most funds have experienced over the last 3 years. But it's also been driven by, and I'm sure you'll have seen this, the very significant change that's happened in gilt yields over the last few months. So obviously those have increased substantially, which has had the effect of reducing the future valuation of our liabilities. So there's been quite a substantial change to the funding position, which has essentially, for now, wiped out the fund's historic deficit. So we're now in quite an unusual position where we have essentially zero historic deficit, but the sort of the underlying economic environment now means that actually our cost of future service is actually increasing. So what's happening is we're seeing reduced deficit costs, but increased costs in the provision of benefits in the future. Sorry, I am just going to check questions as I think I've had a couple come through. No, I cannot see anything there. So that gives a little bit of background to where we are in terms of the funding position. Previous committee meeting, the committee agreed the council's contribution rate, which is so that's now been agreed at 27% of payroll for each of the 3 years. Obviously, it's a reduction on the previous valuation. What we're tending to see is as our historic deficit decreases, we are able to reduce rates, but the ongoing cost of future service accrual remains high. So Hackney's position relative to other similar funds used to be that we paid a much higher contribution level. What's now happening is ours is reducing as our deficit reduces, and the rates paid by other funds are now increasing, which reflects the increasing cost of future service. So yeah, essentially the most significant contributor to the increased funding level we've had is the stronger than predicted investment returns since the last valuation. What is also significant to note, though, is the current inflation position. So what that does mean is obviously we are anticipating a very, very high 2023 pension increase when the pensions increase order comes out. So that's based on CPI inflation in the 12 months to September 22. Essentially, what the Funds Actuary is assuming, and it's generally in line with market views, is that we are seeing this. So we are seeing a sudden spike in inflationary pressure, but overall, we do expect that to be reasonably short term. So the assumptions that the actuaries used around inflation assume that spike. So we're allowing for a very sharp short term increase, which we will see coming through in the 2023 pensions order, and then we are expecting that to reduce and normalise a little bit over the longer term. Other key item to note is that the way the actuary presents the funding position, which you can see in Appendix 1, has changed. So what they used to do is just declare a single funding position and set out the assumptions on which that was based. Obviously, there's been quite a lot of scrutiny through Government Actuaries Department Section 13 in recent years of the way LGPS funds set actuarial assumptions. So what the actuary prefers to do now is to show the sensitivity of the funding position across a range of different investment returns, so you can see how sensitive it is to those different assumptions. Obviously, for legal purposes, we do still have to declare a single funding position, and they've set out in the report how that's been declared. Are there any?
I haven't got the exempt appendix.
Ah, right.
It's not on the .gov. It's not on the .gov.
No, so it shouldn't be published, but you should have received the exempt pack. Peter, the issue you mentioned with Modern Gov, has that extended to not providing exempt appendices to members?
Yeah, it may have caused a problem there. I've just forwarded the papers, the confidential appendices.
Sorry, Peter, I can't hear you very clearly. I think it might just be me.
I just forwarded the appendices.
Right. No, apologies.
Okay, let me just get it. I'm sorry about that.
Apologies for that, as it probably is helpful for everyone who cited those.
Let me find this.
So the whole fund results are Appendix 1. And the funding position and the different assumptions are shown on page 3.
Now I have to sign in. Jeez.
Oh goodness me, I'm so sorry about this.
Because you sent it as a Google Doc, not as an attachment, Peter.
Okay. Sorry about this.
I can share my screen if
It's on its way. No, I've got it. It's getting through. Just no. What you sent was the data improvement update. Is that what I should expect to see as the confidential appendix?
No. So
No,
what you should be expecting to see is a set of.
The
Yeah,
link
no.
should be in the email. But
No, you didn't send that. You sent
Yeah,
the
so one is
confidential.
exempt, 2 are exempt, and one should be public.
I've
I'm
got the
struggling to
report.
access.
So I've got the actual report, which has got that 106% one on it. But in
Rachel, could you
that
share-
report, so if, yeah, I've got the report.
Could you share your screen, Rachel?
But I
Please?
don't.
Yes.
Jackie,
I was just
say something.
Rachel, you probably shouldn't share your screen if it's exempt.
Oh yeah, we're still in. If we are still in public session. Sorry, I forgot we're recorded.
Could we go into private session, please?
Peter, have we got any way?
Yeah,
Do we have any way around this problem?
Could
No.
we go into private session?
That might be one back into live.
Anything that anybody wants to say about this? Rachel, Jackie? Or Jackie can
Yes.
move.
So I do have a sort of short training session that I can give. I'm mindful of time. So if people wanted simply a shorter discussion of the paper with questions raised, I'd be happy to do that. Or I can go through a sort of a very quick run through of slides and some of the key concepts behind the accounts. It's very much up to you as to which is preferred, really.
Michael, do you want some training, more training on pension accounts?
I don't think so. Thanks very much. I'm quite happy for you to go.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's sort of a subject where if you're confident with your way around a balance sheet, it isn't necessarily something where you kind of need the full background to it. Essentially, the paper just presents our draft accounts for, and I have terrible trouble with the years at the moment, for 2021 to 2022, as there's so many 20s involved. To be honest, one of the most notable issue with these accounts is actually around timings of publication and audit. So following the COVID pandemic, to go back a couple of years, our previous deadline for the submission of draft accounts was the 31st of May, following the year end in March. As a result of the COVID pandemic, that was extended out to the 31st of July for the last couple of years. Our previous audit deadline was then July, and that has technically now been adjusted to, I believe it's now September. What we have seen are very, very substantial issues around the timing of audit. And the effect essentially has been that Jackie, I don't think we have a firm timetable yet for the audit of this set of accounts.
Do you want me to come
Go
in
ahead,
there?
Jackie.
Yes. So the audit deadline for the 21-22 accounts, which is the accounts that you're looking at the moment, is the end of November. So
Oh, it's November. Sorry, that's my mistake.
So but what has happened is the audit has started, but I would say there's not a lot of foot soldiers on the ground at the moment. So it has started, and there's a big challenge in terms of that deadline. I mean, we actually published our accounts in accordance with the statutory deadline this year. A lot of authorities didn't, so there is a real challenge with that deadline. It's probably also worth mentioning that our accounts were delayed, in terms of the whole council's accounts were delayed last year because of the cyber attack and the need to do additional work around reconciliations, not the pension fund element of it, but those accounts still remain unsigned up. Audit's complete, but there's a national issue around the evaluation of infrastructure assets, which is meant that sort of audit firms have got a moratorium on actually signing audit opinions. So we have not got our opinion for the 2021 accounts as yet either. So there is some sort of a lot of issues in the audit world at the moment, which is causing delays.
Okay.
Essentially, from our perspective, we have not yet been approached by the council's auditor in terms of audit of the pension fund accounts. To be honest, the key issue for us is around publication of the annual report. So we are required to publish by the 1st of December. Generally, the assumption is that the annual report will be published containing the signed off and the audited and signed off accounts, and the annual report is also audited. Obviously, we consider it very, very unlikely that we will meet that deadline this year. We did not meet it last year because of the issue around lack of sign off on the council's accounts means that we still have no certificate for the pension fund. So everything is the draft report for the previous year is published. It's available on the website, but it still says draft on it, as we don't yet have a final certificate. What we expect is something quite similar this year. We are anticipating that essentially we will need to publish the annual report without having had the accounts audited. What we will do is we will as we did last year, we will take a draft version of the report to a November meeting of the committee, and essentially look for sign off in principle, so that we are able to publish something. And then we're simply reliant on audit resourcing as to when we're able to get the draft accounts audited. So we are pleased to have met the deadline for publication of draft accounts, but we are very mindful that the likelihood that we will be fully audited by the deadline is very, very low.
Slightly beyond your control, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is around audit resourcing issues. It's something that it's something that we've sort of said. Essentially, the draft accounts are ready to be audited, but we are really mindful that there are issues for virtually every local authority around, as Jackie said, national issues with infrastructure assets. There's very significant sort of audit resourcing shortages. So we are really mindful. It's essentially a case of waiting, and we will do what we can to meet publication deadlines with draft information.
That's what I wouldn't be my approach. I think would be to publish, even if you have to put draft accounts in, and then update it on websites if people are interested in final accounts, because that's within your control in the publishing. The audit, the progress and completion of the audit is outside of your control, and sitting waiting for that to finish. I think I don't know. Does anyone disagree that we should be encouraging Rachel and her team to do that? I think get it out there. And
where we expect, we don't expect to need, fingers crossed, we do not expect to need to make significant changes to the accounts following audit. I would really hope that we don't, and we haven't done in previous years. Where the only change that I'd highlight that we might expect is that we have had some delay. We took on new private market assets in the accounting year, and we have had quite a number of delays to private market valuations. So what we have done is obviously we have used stale pricing. In the accounts we published with that. We have now received updated information that obviously is a little bit different, and it's something we will take audit advice as to whether they would like us to update that at the point of audit.
So we respond. It's not a problem, is it? You just that's the whole point of audit. Somebody marks your homework and suggests a better way to do it, and that's that. Yeah. So it's our sort of private markets and our less liquid assets, where there's a lot more judgment involved in valuation, is that it's something we flag with the auditors we try and flag it early with the auditors every single year, as that's probably our sort of greatest area of risk around accounting judgments, is valuation of those assets, and we do have more of them than we used to. Everyone happy with this item? Ready to move on? Yeah. Pension committee work plan. So any comments on that one? March and June meetings, basically, it talks about, doesn't it? Any questions?
Not from me, thank you.
All seems fairly straightforward. Keeping themselves busy. And data improvement update. That's not exempt, is it?
No, that is not exempt. It's something that we are particularly happy to publish, given how many times in the past we have reported ourselves to the pensions regulator. I'm really happy to publish a notification that we haven't had to do so this year. So this is the continuation of a series of reports that we brought over the last few years. And essentially this time we are really pleased to be able to set out that we have seen this year, and we've discussed it a bit previously. We have seen a really significant improvement in the quality of our data, and sort of our ability to produce it when required in a timely fashion. So the reports, I mean, you're both quite familiar with the history of it. The report sort of presents that history. Essentially, the big driver of the improvement has been automation of the data provided by Hackney Council. So that's been an awful lot of years it's been an awful lot of years in development. We've, you know, it is a very technical area. It's something we as a fund have struggled with the technical expertise needed for it. The council has struggled. We were able a couple of years ago to find a very experienced external consultant who'd worked with councils with similar issues previously, and she has really been instrumental in helping Equinity and the council and Midland, who are the payroll software provider, to work together to be able to get that automated. So we've gone into live now, and essentially each month the council is now providing a fully automated data upload to Equinity, which is, you know, that has hugely improved the quality of what's been sent, and it's also reduced the amount of manual work that Equinity are having to do at the other end, which is obviously quite significant in terms of freeing up resource for them to focus on other things. So that's very, very helpful. And it's, you know, we were aware of the improvement, but, you know, over the past couple of months we have had it evaluated, we have had it sort of validated by the fact that we've been able, you know, Equinity have been able to produce a strong set of valuation data. There was a little bit of extra work required around the bill, around Equinity's build for the upload to Hyman's, which there's a national template that all LGPS funds need to adhere to. So there was Equinity have had a few sort of minor issues around that, but the fund actuary has been really happy with the quality of data. We were one of their earliest clients to submit it, so that's been really pleasing. There's you know, as expected, we've had a few teething issues with the upload in live, which we are making good progress in resolving those. So those have mostly been around issue. It's been around the traditional issue of pre-2014 salary information, but even the quality of that has improved very substantially. And again, we've been able to, for the first time in very many years, we have been able to produce annual benefit statements for both active and deferred members on time. So we have been really pleased with that.
Well done. I mean, I think those of us that have been on the journey with, as you're probably supposed to describe it, recognise what a significant achievement this is. But you won't be surprised what I'm going to say next, which is, how do we know it won't go bad again? Are we doing all of this? Because you know the pain. Everyone, you know, all parties, everybody who's been anywhere near it forever knows how much of a pain it was. So we don't want to mess it up. So yeah. Are we confident that, you know, the council, because they were the biggest offender in this one, but the council, you know, all of the other employers in the scheme, that our pensions administration at the council, so the council as an employer, but the council as the administrating authority, and Equinity, are we reflective on a periodic basis where that, you know, that's whether that's monthly or quarterly, about what didn't work through here? So what does that tell us, so that we catch problems when they're small, so that they don't become big, messy, smelly ones? Jackie,
I think as Rachel.
No, Jackie put her hand up. Jackie put her hand up, Rachel, so that I'll take you off to that.
I think as Rachel mentioned, that the actual interface has had a big impact in terms of that quality of data. But you're right, we need to make sure we don't rest on our laurels, and we've got regular recognising that the council has been potentially the worst offender. I think that's right. I haven't got all the history in the past in relation to the data, so we have got regular meetings with the payroll set up with myself, Rachel, the head of payroll, and the head of HR, actually, who manages payroll, to try and pick up issues if and when they arise, and also try to what's the word? Have a forward look around things that could cause us issues, so that we can address them before they arise. So I think we have got those arrangements in place, and we can continue to be sort of mindful of the issues that we've had in the past.
Excellent. And have you got the resources that you need for that, Rachel and Jackie? Because you know, at times I don't think the council did resource solving this problem to at the appropriate level, and so we don't want to, now it's been fixed, they don't say, right, well then you don't need any resources for stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? So what we need to, and keeping on top of it and monitoring regularly. If there is an issue, we can raise it and sort of escalate it in a timely manner. But at the moment, we're okay. We mean,
just to add to what Jackie said, we are approaching a point where we will sort of check in on one particular risk, which is simply around, up till now we have had external consultancy support with the production of the upload, and obviously essentially it's the upload has now been in live for a number of months, and we are at the point where the consultant is looking to step back quite soon, which obviously that is a good point to test. You know, do we have the resources in payroll to be able to deal with, say, data exceptions that come back from the upload? You know, are payroll and ICT working together to resolve those? Because it's clear to us that does require input from both teams, so there's collaborative working required. So I think the next big test for us will be to see, you know, is the council resourced to be able to do that without external support? And I think the position is much more positive than it was, say, a couple of years ago. The team you know, our view is that the team has been able to sort of build its skill set since then. Another thing that I think it's a potential short-term disruption, but I think is positive in the long term, is that the gradual integration of the Hackney payroll team with the Hackney education payroll team. So the Hackney education team have very significant experience of using Trent, which is the council's payroll system. Historically, they've sat separately to the council, so maybe worked a little bit in silos. I think there may be some initial disruption from integrating those teams, but I think having them work together hopefully does build the resilience of the team quite a lot, and mean that, you know, we will have essentially more very experienced people sat in the same place and able to deal with sort of issues around sort of exceptions that have come back from the reports and similar. So there is a little bit of a flashpoint in terms of the risk of the council managing on its own, and it's something that we will report back to the board on that, because in six months' time we would expect to see payroll operating that report independently.
Good. Glad we're all aware of the risks and just deal with them when they're small and manageable and can be quickly resolved. That's really important. Excellent. Well done. It does feel like the end of a long time.
It does, but also, yeah, an awful lot of the work on it happened while I was away. I sort of come back and it was almost ready to go live, which was fantastic.
You lived through the bad time, Rachel. You can get some of the glory for it finishing. Okay, any other business? Membership of the board. So I'm sure I had a note from Hugo saying that because he's no longer a governor at MCA, and
Right.
so we'd look to include Hugo because of his connections with schools, well, with academies.
Yeah.
But I am conscious that Michael's written to you this year about our status, and
Yes.
I've written to you about our status. So could you update us about the board membership, please, Rachel?
Yes. So sort of as I set out to in sort of the initial response, which I am conscious was a number of months ago. So I do apologise for the fact that you have not perhaps had an update from me sort of as recently as I should have sent one. Essentially, what you know, as we discussed previously, though. Essentially, it has been noted by our governance services that both you and Michael are, I think, quite considerably, I think, over the agreed term. So as we discussed, what we have done is to send out with annual benefit statements to make members aware that there is an opportunity to apply. As I think both Samantha, you will remember the initial application process. Is that we had a panel to assess applications. I have to admit I have not yet received anything around I have not yet received any expressions of interest from other scheme members, although I do look out for them. For those who apply, obviously we would, we have been, I don't think there'll be any debate over the fact we have been, very pleased with the contribution, the quite significant contribution you and Michael have made to the board. We would be really delighted if you were to apply again.
So basically, okay, can you send us forms and we will apply?
Yes, we will send you forms. The forms are quite
that's all we need to do is send us a form and we'll fill it in.
It is quite a simple process. Although, if you haven't had a form, can I ask? Because you must.
I did get a benefit statement. I did get a benefit statement. Now you say, I think I did see a membership form in there. Yeah.
I was having a small panic. Fantastic. There is one in there. I will send you everything in more detail. And yes, we would be delighted if you were to reapply.
Okay. So Michael and I, send us one of those. Presumably you can send them electronically.
Yes, I can, and they can be sent back electronically as well. As obviously, given that we're holding board meetings remotely, it would be a bit remiss of us not to be able to send them out to you by email.
Okay, so that brings it to another point of conversation for me. Is the intention to continue with remote pension boards?
So my view is that it is up to the board. The big issue with committee meetings taking place remotely is the difficulty is that members who are attending remotely aren't eligible to vote, but that isn't the case for the board, which has an oversight and scrutiny role. So I think from a sort of, Catherine, you may have something to add. From a sort of technical perspective, I don't see any issue with continuing remote meetings if those are easier and preferred for board members.
I mean, my view would be it's probably for the new pensions board, whoever they are, to determine, but that it is entirely proper for this pension board to say what the next board will be to. So shall we say we'll do it remotely next time, and then it will be, if you put it, Peter, if you could put it on the agenda for the new membership of the new board. They should consider, yeah. So we've not overreached, but we've got a few. Michael, is that okay with you?
Absolutely, yeah.
Do it like that. And when is the next board planned for?
Peter, go ahead.
I'll circulate the date after this meeting.
Okay.
We have historically held the meetings in March and around sort of October, November. So this is a slightly earlier than usual board. And yeah, it's partly as I wanted to look at just aligning the board dates with those of the committee, as it means you get slightly more current papers when it comes to what you actually get presented in your paper pack. These are essentially your papers are essentially what the committee will see as well. So there's an element of do you prefer to see sort of the same, you know, the same information live at the same time as the committee, or would you prefer to review after the fact?
May as well have it live at the same time.
Yeah.
On the board, if we apply, which looks like we are. Okay, Rachel, any other business from you?
I think for me that we've covered everything. The only thing I might just want to highlight is, as well as scheme member reps, we are still if Hugo has resigned, we are now down 2 employer reps. So I'm hoping I'm hoping within the council we will be able to appoint the council's rep before the next board. Obviously, it does mean that we will have to go out to employers again for a small employer rep, because yeah, we do really appreciate the contribution that Hugo made, and it was, you know, it's helpful for us to have that smaller employer perspective. So we will obviously look to appoint both new employer reps as well.
I'll see if I can scare up. I'm not sure that the Mossbourne Federation is that small an employer, but I'll see if I can scare up some interest in at Mossbourne.
Yeah, the academies are quite a sort of quite a good source of potential representatives, as a lot of our employers are very, very small, and would, you know, we're often looking at sort of, you know, micro companies who already struggle with sort of the administration burden of being in the LGPS, and sort of, I am not, you know, in terms of time, I am not sure they would have the time or resources to sort of put a representative on the board, even though they might like to do so. I
mean, one thing that does strike me is I am also involved in the Mossbourne Federation, so maybe
yes,
it would be a good thing for something. Maybe the City Federation is also
yeah,
a large,
and
somebody in the Federation. See if
we
they've
will
got
certainly contact. We'll certainly contact the academies and relevant and the federated academies. You know, they would probably be they will be our first point of call. We will advertise to all employers, but as you're familiar with, we do struggle with with appointing that sort of smaller employer rep. So if we don't hear anything back from kind of an initial inquiry, then those academies would probably be our first point of call.
Yeah, I mean, I'll see if there's a Mossbourne person, but I mean, I do think maybe somebody from City of London Federation. Yeah. They're the other bigger federation, aren't they? So do that, and the secondary schools have just got that. They've got some of that scale that means that they perhaps be more interested.
Yeah. Because obviously, and we've done similar with the employer rep on the pensions committee, because obviously we've got Henry still.
Excellent. Okay, Jackie, any other business from you?
Oh, thank you.
Peter?
No, thank you, Chair.
Catherine?
No, thank you.
Michael?
No, thank you.
Mario? I think you must be from committee services. Anything from you? No?
Nothing from me.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, right, we'll see you next time then.
Brilliant, thank you.
Perfect.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.